we are moving on to a session that promises to be both engaging and thought-provoking. A fireside chat on evolving policy and regulation in an interconnected, open finance world. We are privileged to have two distinguished experts who bring a wealth of experience and insights to this very important conversation. Our first expert, Mr. Mortimer Schutts. Mr. Ivan is a seasoned expert in financial and digital sector development and policy, currently serving as a consultant to the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group. With over 12 years of experience in Asia, he has advised private companies, financial services authorities, and industry bodies on sector innovations and investments. His career includes impactful roles at BNP Paribas, advisory think tanks like Sciences PO, and financial intermediaries across Europe. He holds degrees from prestigious institutions like the London School of Economics, Sciences Po Paris, and UWC of the Atlantic. Please help me welcome Mr. Ivan Mortimer. Joining him is Mr. Rahul Matthan, a partner at TriLegal, where he leads the technology practice. He is an authority on technology law with a particular focus on cryptocurrency, tech, M&A, telecommunications, and internet law. He's been a driving force in shaping India's technology policies and served on numerous key committees, including RBI Household Finance Committee. He's also the author of The Third Way, which explores India's data governance strategy, and he has served as a digital public infrastructure advisor during India's G20 presidency. Currently, he continues to make an impact as a member of the board of TriLegal, and I'm sure you're excited to hear their expert perspectives on how policy and regulation are evolving. Please help me welcome Mr. Rahul Matthan.
Thank you. Thank you all. We are running a bit late, so we're going to keep this snappy. And up until now, the conversation has been very focused on India and what India has achieved, and it's really remarkable what India has achieved. But I wanted to ground this in the particular point in history that we are at right now, as far as the world is concerned. This year, we have had more elections than ever in a long time. And the results of these elections have been quite remarkable. Almost all the elections that we have witnessed have been elections where the incumbents have been kicked out. And they've been kicked out on planks of very nationalistic ideas. The fact that we don't want immigrants in our country anymore. We want to be very much closed within our borders. And in that context, when we have a panel which is titled, an entire session talking about let's open finance, and a panel that's attempting to look at this from an international perspective, it sounds like we're doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. But the exception to all of this has actually been India, and quite frankly, a lot of the developing world. In 2018, when Justice Sri Krishna issued the first draft of the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is now enacted as the DPDP, one of the provisions that he introduced was the provision of data localization. It was the first time that this hard data localization came about. Every subsequent draft has diluted that position till the final framework in the current law is that there is no data localization. We will have a schedule where we will list some countries that we might in a future time say you cannot transfer data to. But at this point in time, we are open for business. And we are looking to move data across borders, and we are free to accept data from other countries into India. And I think Chanchal mentioned this in his keynote just before the break, India's G20 actually put this idea on the map. And I think it is in that context that it is really important to try and understand, the context of all that we've achieved in terms of building out the largest open finance network in the world and India's positioning through the G20 as a strong voice for digital public infrastructure, and what it means, having done all of this, for us to now, having built the largest open finance network in the country, to be ambitious and start to think about what our role and our responsibility is in open finance globally. And that's sort of the framework that I want to set, and I want to turn to you, Ivan, to use that perhaps as a framework to discuss, some of these issues that we've spent the morning discussing in the context of where we can get to with open finance globally.
Thank you, Rahul. Yeah, I would echo some of those remarks. I mean, I think the context for the audience here today and this discussion is really, it couldn't be more important, in fact, I think, because really there are a whole bunch of different forces that we heard about this morning that have put us at the cusp, really, and I think Mr. Kamath said it right, he used the right term. It's a super cycle. We're going through another evolution, not just at a national level, but at an international level, in how, just in the more general sense, data is shaping the way networks, economics, politics operate. And so what's going on here in India is critical and very important, not just simply because of the size of India. Anything that happens really in the ecosystems here already gains global significance due to simple numbers. But it goes beyond that basic instinct, because we're looking at overlapping trends in the diversification and precisely the democratization of the digital economy. We've gotten to a point where a lot of the very large networks that we almost take for granted as, if I can abuse the term a little bit, as parts of actually private digital infrastructure, themselves need to evolve to the next stage to reach the next wave of consumers, to connect the dots with other platforms that have risen over time in different markets, different sectors. And that's what's driving a lot of the fundamental need to be able to share data across silos, across industry lines, across jurisdictions, and to be able to do it in a way which addresses the legitimate and often sort of contrasting concerns and motivations of consumers. How do they get actually invested? How do they benefit from this, so that the gains from digital evolution are shared in a way which we think is more equitable and also conducive to international collaboration? And it's in that context that I think the digital public infrastructure debate, which really has been brought to the international scene thanks to the motivations and actions of the Indian government and the industry here, is really a crucial starting point for us to move ahead in this super cycle and to find ways to solve these problems, not just at a national level, but thinking about how to do this at an international level.
And look, I think the super cycle is a really powerful framework, and I'm sure we're going to keep coming back to this. But if we do this internationalization of open finance, there are certain very, very challenging problems that we've got to overcome. And that's really the reason why these data localization ideas came about, which is, we have bad actors. And the reasons why regulations are in place are to prevent bad actors from misusing these powerful data systems that we've created. And so I think really the trade-off very often becomes, how do you ensure that we can allow all the benefits of open finance to be accrued, but at the same time mitigate the harms? We're all very impressed by the efficiency gains that these systems can give, but as efficient as it makes the good actors, it will make bad actors just as efficient. And you magnify that when you then think about cross-border and the complexities of some of these really multi-jurisdictional finance transactions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we do certainly need to focus on the risks. Every evolution in the way, not just the digital economy, but more generally in economic evolution and innovation, comes with the risks of unknown, and a lot of those risks will be exploited by people that don't have the right intentions. And we see that very clearly. Just a very down-to-earth example that we're, I think, all now very familiar with is what's happened in the realm of instant payments. Now, undoubtedly, the advent and rise of instant payments is beneficial overall. But we've also seen that just as rapidly as people have adopted it, we've seen a spike. Well, actually, I'm not even sure if we've reached the spike, but we've certainly seen a rise in the use of these instant payment systems to commit fraud, not just at a domestic, but at a cross-border basis. And that's an interesting example, actually, where we have different motivations working to actually drive us forward towards the efficiency frontier in balancing off the need and the interest in sharing data, or at least sharing access to data, with the need to control or police or mitigate different risks. So we have regulators of different kinds who previously were mostly intent on protecting consumers domestically by preserving data and controlling data access, actually now faced with a countervailing need to share data between regulatory authorities and consumer protection authorities cross-border in order to track down where that money has gone. But I would highlight two other areas of risks, or I wouldn't call them risks, but just simple economic fundamental forces that are going to influence how ecosystems like the one here in India are going to play a role. First of all, we also need to recognize that there are legitimate commercial sensitivities about data sharing. There's a lot more data out there, not just in the financial sector, but in other sectors to do with green reporting, to do with manufacturing, supply chain visibility, trade, many other domains that are advancing in parallel in a broad sense with what's going on in the financial sector, where the technology is also there, but some of the impediments are legitimate concerns by corporations about who's going to have access to my data. Are they going to even be able to basically discover secrets about my supply chain or my suppliers by analyzing not just the underlying data, but even the metadata? And at the same time, we have the same kind of problem going on at the level of politics in trade policy, where countries are also quite proactively negotiating digital trade agreements with a sense that not only do we need to open up borders for not just data and digital business models, but with the sense that there's also gains from trade in data. That data is, as people put it, is an asset, a very particular asset, but nevertheless an asset that drives new business models. And so totally opening our borders to data free flow might be giving away things for free that in a very kind of mercantilist spirit of trade policy would be naive. So I think those are two extra forces I would highlight that are shaping the way this landscape is evolving.
And I don't want to blatantly plug my book, but I wrote a book called The Third Way, where I speak about this particular thing that we've built and the fact that we've actually embedded regulatory principles directly into the code of the infrastructure that all of us run our systems on. And to me, it appears that this is an extraordinarily powerful reframing of the way in which regulation can take place. As we become more and more digital in everything that we do, And there were many people in this room who perhaps are more interested in ensuring that their phone is charged than they've left home with their wallet, because we are much more interested in ensuring that UPI works, Aadhaar works, I have to catch a flight tonight, DigiYatra works, than to actually have cash in my wallet. I have cash in my wallet. It stayed in my wallet for the last 6 months. It's not been moved. But in that world, the old regime of paper-based laws that, as a lawyer I've been practicing for 30 years, seems to be antiquated. As we look to build open finance more globally, is this a framework that India can look to export? Are there other countries that could align with this sort of thinking? As we see volumes of transactions increase, I think that with velocity, there is an incapacity of traditional regulators to apply traditional means of regulation. And that we need to have new means of regulation, and my argument in the book is that it should be built into the infrastructure. I guess the question to you, I'm so close to this, I've seen it evolve. The question to you is, what does the rest of the world think of something like this? I know Europe has come out with eIDAS regulations for an interoperable identity wallet. Is this something that we can see more of as countries become more digital like India has?
So that's a really interesting question. I think it's one preoccupies my time now these days. So I have kind of two answers to that, I think. One is, I'll start simple. I think the first point is that at a simplest way, most other jurisdictions of size are indeed grappling with their own forms of open finance. And they've tended to be very pragmatic about it and looked at it through the lens of, as we know in the industry, first open banking and now maybe open finance, and then we'll see a little bit further. And so in that context, I think people are largely focused on their own problems, which is normal. You have your own ecosystem, you're trying to reform your own ecosystem, and inevitably a lot of the different approaches to this problem are therefore becoming very context and market specific. And I think that will continue to be the case. A lot of them are built on, the market structure being perhaps more bank-based, more led by fintechs. In the US, of course, they've taken a different approach, which I would say is obviously less influenced by regulation. So that will continue on its course, and I think that the richness of the world will demonstrate that there are pros and cons to many of these different approaches that are locally specific. But what's more important about what's going on here, I think, in India, is that there's a much longer term architectural thinking that's involved in what you've done here, which is fundamentally, I think, on a path to scalability that we don't see in some of the other markets where solutions have been built around the incumbent institutions and market infrastructures. And that I think is the more interesting debate to be had, especially when we start to think about not just how we share data, how we control data, how we even conceptualize the grammar and actions around data for finance, but how that architecture applies beyond finance. And again, that was raised earlier in the morning by alluding to the longer term prospects for this architecture to be something that facilitates sharing and the trusting and the control of healthcare data, agricultural data, many other domains that actually also drive not just personal decisions and commercial decisions, but also lead back to more sound financial decisions. And this is where I think that there will be a bigger role for the Indian ecosystem to play in figuring out how that grammar, and it really is kind of thinking about a grammar of finance and data going forward, becomes more scalable across nations. And then one last point, and then I think it's the issue will be governance. Yep. We will eventually come back to how does this get governed beyond the technology, And when you speak about governance, then you enter a realm where nationally based or regionally based solutions need to be scaled up through collaboration together. And the seeds are in the words, if they're still up there, yeah, of togetherness and coordination implicitly. And I think that'll be the challenge to scaling up what has been done here.
We've just got 2 minutes, and you've just set this up perfectly for the last question that I have, which is, first of all, thank you for saying governance is important. I'm worried whether I was going to lose a job with all the automation, but lawyers are always going to be important. The most impressive thing I think that we have seen in recent times is this idea of the Finternet. There was a paper that was written by Nandan and Augustine Carstens. I think that if you are talking about a grammar, the Finternet paper is the first very early attempt to write a grammar for international finance. Because of course it's useful for the national context, but in the international context, having this kind of a grammar, a taxonomy of how transactions need to be reconceptualized in the digital context is super important. And this is really, thinking out 10 years in advance, but it would be great to end the panel with some thoughts on that paper, what it's missing, what are the things we need to fill out, and how it fits into this vision of global open finance.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on. I mean, it brings us back to this notion of the supercycle. We are all extremely familiar with standards in other parts of the established economy. Everything from the containers that we'll see down in the ports to SWIFT standards. The list goes on and on. In fact, we're actually quite good at using and accepting internationally governed standards in many other, let's call them, former analog versions of the economy and even Web 2.0 versions of the economy. And we're moving into this distributed ecosystem. And so it's actually just normal that as more of our world becomes part of this digital ecosystem, we will, in one shape or another, be forced to standardize. Not just the data, in fact, the data itself being standardized is probably the least important. It is our relationship to the data, our relationship to these virtual assets. And I mean virtual assets in a much broader sense than things like Bitcoin or digital tokens. And we're beginning to realize that the world is a very complex place, and putting it into intelligent code is going to indeed be a 10-year journey. But we can also see that it's, first of all, inevitable just through habit. And I think that there are extremely good precedents having done this in other domains. And lastly, it's forcing us to actually be thinking a little bit more accurately about this very particular asset we call data, which is an economic good of very special merit. It doesn't get used up when I give it to you. It actually gets increased in value if I let you use it. And we have multiple relationships with it. We have the ability to access it, to share it, to change it. We have economic ownership. Maybe we have governance of it. There are a multitude of relationships that need to be reflected in this new grammar around data. And that's what I think sits in front of us, and what the Finternet concept and vision actually helps us begin to grapple with at an international scale.
20 minutes is never enough to get into a conversation. We've done a quick canter through a number of topics. Thank you so much, Ivan. I just wanted to close with what Mr. Kamath said. He did a very quick back-of-the-envelope maths to say that next year the number that we're going to hit is remarkable. I would just push it a little further to say we're going to continue to grow, and if we are, our numbers have got to include a much more global landscape if we are to really fulfill the ambition and the vision of open finance. So thank you all very much.
I don't think either of you are going to lose jobs anytime soon, so with all that you've shared with us. So thank you so much. We're calling upon Mr. Ganesh to just share a little bit of appreciation from SamvAAD's side. Thank you so much.